The bombshell confession. A single, heartbreaking confession from Princess Anne shattered the myth of the Queen's perfect marriage. The dark truth she revealed about why her parents lived apart was so devastating, it brought King Charles to tears. For over 70 years, they were the unshakable foundation of a global empire, the symbols of an enduring love story that captivated the world. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, presented a flawless portrait of duty, devotion, and a perfect royal marriage. But behind the palace walls, a dark and heartbreaking truth was kept hidden, a secret so devastating it would one day bring a king to his knees. The myth was shattered not by a tabloid exposé, but by the quiet, brutal honesty of their own daughter. It all began in the somber quiet of a monarchy in mourning. As King Charles prepared to face the first anniversary of his mother's death, he was a man adrift in grief. Seeking to create a fitting tribute, he assigned a simple duty to his famously stoic and pragmatic sister, Princess Anne. He asked her to participate in an interview to share some fond memories of their parents. He never suspected that in doing so, he was lighting the fuse on a bombshell that had been dormant for decades. In that interview, Princess Anne did something unthinkable. She peeled back the gilded facade of the world's most famous marriage and revealed the cold, harsh reality beneath. Her confession was not filled with scandalous tales of affairs, but with something far more chilling: the truth. She spoke of a union built not on fairy tale romance, but on brutal pragmatism. Her parents, she explained, were partners in a demanding business, the business of monarchy. Their lives were a series of long, lonely stretches spent living apart, bound by duty, only to slowly come back together when the job required it. Her words painted a bleak and devastating picture. The public image of an inseparable couple was a carefully managed performance. The reality was two individuals navigating a shared destiny, often from a great distance. But the worst was yet to come. Anne finally addressed the question that had baffled the world: why Prince Philip had chosen to live apart from the Queen at the end of his life, retreating to the solitude of Wood Farm. The official story was one of a peaceful retirement. The truth, as Anne revealed, was a final, shocking statement. It was not a gentle retreat, it was an escape. It was the last act of a man who had sacrificed his name, his career, and his freedom, and who, in the end, simply wanted out. For King Charles, a son still grappling with the loss of his mother, hearing this cold, hard reality articulated so plainly was a crushing blow. The stoic monarch, who had weathered so many public storms, was left in tears. The perfect marriage was a myth, the fairy tale was a lie, and he was now forced to confront the dark and complicated truth of the sacrifices his parents had made, not just for the crown, but from each other. The seeds of that complicated and ultimately tragic destiny were sown decades earlier, in the summer of 1939, on the eve of a world war. It all began with a chance encounter at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth, a meeting that would alter the course of history. A young, sheltered Princess Elizabeth, then just 13 years old, was visiting the college with her family when a sudden outbreak of mumps and chickenpox forced a change in plans. The princess and her sister, Margaret, were confined to the grounds, their formal tour abruptly cancelled. To entertain the bored royal children, a dashing 18-year-old naval cadet was summoned. He was their distant cousin, a young man of striking looks and restless energy. This was Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, a man whose life had already been forged by unimaginable tragedy. He was a prince without a kingdom, exiled from his homeland in an orange crate as an infant after a violent political coup. His family had been shattered, his mother committed to a psychiatric asylum, his father abandoning them for a mistress in the south of France. He was a boy raised by relatives, a rootless wanderer with a chip on his shoulder, and an ambition that burned like a fire. Faced with the future Queen of England, Philip was not intimidated. With a confidence that bordered on arrogance, he immediately set out to impress her. He showed off his athletic prowess, leaping effortlessly over the tennis nets and dazzling her with his quick wit during a game of croquet. For the sheltered princess, who had lived a life dictated by stifling protocol, this confident, worldly young man was a revelation. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated magic, the first spark of an obsession that would come to define her entire life. Her governess, Marion Crawford, later recalled the profound impact of that afternoon. She never took her eyes off him, Crawford wrote. From that day forward, the young princess never seriously considered another man. He was the one. But this charming, sun-drenched encounter masked a much darker reality. It was a fateful meeting of two vastly different destinies. For her, it was the beginning of a lifelong love. For him, it was the first step on a path that would lead him to the heart of the British monarchy, but also to a gilded cage from which he would never truly escape. Soon after their fateful meeting, the world plunged into the abyss of the Second World War. Prince Philip, now a full-fledged officer in the Royal Navy, was sent far from England, serving with distinction in the Mediterranean and the Pacific. He faced the brutal realities of naval combat, his ship once dodging bombs during the invasion of Sicily. But the vast physical distance between the young officer and the future queen only served to intensify their secret, burgeoning romance. Their connection was nurtured through a steady stream of letters, a fragile lifeline that crossed war-torn continents. Back in the heavily guarded confines of Windsor Castle, Princess Elizabeth lived a life of quiet duty, carrying out public engagements and broadcasting messages of hope to the children of the Commonwealth. Yet, her heart was far away, with the handsome, swashbuckling prince, whose photograph she kept proudly on her mantelpiece. The image, showing Philip with a full naval beard, was a constant, private reminder of the man who had so completely captured her imagination. Their correspondence became the center of her world, a secret pact that grew stronger with every censored page that arrived. This was far more than a simple wartime romance. It was a desperate escape for them both. For Elizabeth, trapped in a world of suffocating royal protocol, Philip's letters were a window into a life of action, danger, and freedom. He was the adventure she could only dream of. For Philip, the rootless exile who had never known a stable home, Elizabeth was his anchor. She represented a future, a purpose, and a sense of belonging that had eluded him his entire life. He was a man fighting for a country that was not yet his, fueled by the promise of a life with the woman who was its future. Their love was forged in the crucible of global conflict, a powerful bond that promised a new world, one that seemed an impossible dream amid the chaos and bloodshed that surrounded them. But that dream would soon demand a devastating price. When Prince Philip returned to England, a war hero in 1946, the secret romance that had smoldered in letters for years finally exploded into a serious commitment. During a holiday at the royal retreat of Balmoral, he formally proposed to Princess Elizabeth. He wrote ecstatically of being in love, completely and without reservation, believing his personal happiness was finally within reach. But their joy was immediately met with a cold, hard wall of opposition from the royal establishment. The fairy tale was about to turn into a nightmare. To the powerful courtiers and advisors surrounding King George VI, Prince Philip was utterly and dangerously unsuitable. He was a foreign prince with virtually no money and a family history that was a public relations disaster. His sisters had all married prominent German aristocrats, some with direct and damning ties to the Nazi Party. In a nation still scarred by the Blitz, this was an unforgivable stain. Beyond his lineage, they despised his personality, finding him arrogant, loud, and shockingly unrefined. The king's inner circle saw him as a brash outsider, a penniless opportunist looking to marry his way into power. The opposition was not just political, it was deeply personal. Elizabeth's own mother, the future Queen Mother, was initially horrified by the match. She distrusted Philip's German blood and derisively nicknamed him the Hun. The king, though more sympathetic, was pressured by his advisors to delay the engagement, hoping his daughter's infatuation might fade. But Elizabeth was resolute. She had chosen her man, and she would not be swayed. Faced with her determination, the establishment began a systematic process of stripping Philip of his identity. Before the engagement could be announced, he was forced to renounce his Greek and Danish royal titles. He had to become a naturalized British citizen, a humiliating process for a man who had just fought for the country. And in a final blow, he had to abandon his family name, Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg, Gudlokuxburg, and adopt the more palatable English surname of his mother's family, Mountbatten. The official engagement was finally announced on the 9th of July 1947, but the message from the palace was clear. He was a prince without a home, a man without a name, and they were determined to ensure he would never forget his place. Despite the vicious palace intrigue, the wedding of Princess Elizabeth and the newly minted Philip Mountbatten went ahead on the 20th of November, 1947. For a nation still cloaked in the grey austerity of the post-war years, it was a desperately needed spectacle of hope and glamour. Winston Churchill himself called it a flash of color on the hard road we have to travel. The grand ceremony at Westminster Abbey was a global event, broadcast by BBC Radio to an estimated 200 million listeners around the world. It was a fairy tale manufactured for a broken world, a carefully constructed performance designed to distract from the harsh realities of rationing and rebuilding. But behind the dazzling public celebration, the dark shadows of conflict and personal animosity lingered. The palace establishment, having failed to stop the marriage, delivered one final, cruel rebuke. Philip's German relatives, including his own 3 surviving sisters, were pointedly not invited to the wedding. The wounds of the war were too fresh, the optics of their presence deemed too damaging, and so the groom stood at the altar of Westminster Abbey largely alone, a man who had already been forced to give up his titles, his nationality, and his name. Now, on the most important day of his life, he was also severed from what remained of his family. He stood there, a solitary figure, watching his radiant bride walk towards him. The world saw a perfect couple, the embodiment of a glorious new future for Britain. But the reality was far more complex. The grand spectacle was a performance, a stark and painful contrast between the public image of unity and the private reality of a groom who had been systematically isolated by the very institution he was marrying into. They were celebrated as symbols of a new beginning. But for Philip, the day was a brutal reminder of the sacrifices and humiliations that would come to define the rest of his life. The cheering crowds couldn't see that for him. The gilded cage was already beginning to close. Little did they know, a brief, idyllic escape was just around the corner. For a fleeting 2 years, between 1949 and 1951, Elizabeth and Philip were allowed a taste of the ordinary life they both craved. Philip, determined to continue the naval career he loved, was stationed on the sun-drenched Mediterranean island of Malta. In a surprising move, Elizabeth joined him, leaving their 2 young children, Charles and Anne, back in England with their grandparents. There, on the island of Malta, away from the suffocating scrutiny of the London press and the scheming of the palace courtiers, she was not Princess Elizabeth, heir to the throne. She was simply Mrs. Mountbatten, a naval officer's wife. They lived in a rented home, the Villa Gardamangia, and for the first and only time in their lives, they experienced a kind of freedom. She could drive her own open-top car into town, handle cash in shops, and gossip with other military wives at the hairdressers. He was the man in charge, a respected and ambitious officer quickly rising through the ranks on his own merit. Not because of who he had married, it was a golden interlude, a time of genuine, uncomplicated happiness. Friends who knew them during that period recalled a couple deeply in love, laughing at parties, going to the cinema, and enjoying the simple rhythms of a normal life. She was a young wife, supporting her husband's career. He was a proud man providing for his family. They were a team, partners in a life that finally felt like their own. But this fragile paradise was doomed from the start. They were living on borrowed time, blissfully unaware that a cruel twist of fate was about to shatter their Maltese dream and plunge them into a life from which there would be no escape. The nightmare was just beginning. Then, out of nowhere, a cruel twist of fate derailed everything. On the 6th of February 1952, the idyllic Maltese dream came to an abrupt and devastating end. King George VI, Elizabeth's beloved father, died suddenly in his sleep from a coronary thrombosis. The news reached the young couple while they were on a royal tour in Kenya, staying at the remote Treetops Hotel. In a single, horrifying instant, their world was turned upside down. Elizabeth, at just 25 years old, was no longer a carefree naval wife. She was a queen. The weight of this transformation was immediate and crushing. For Philip, it was a professional and personal death sentence. At 30 years old, he was a promising naval commander on the fast track to success. Now, that career was over. His independence, his ambition, and his very identity were extinguished overnight. Friends who were with him when he received the news noted that he looked as if half the world had dropped on him. The life he had carefully built for himself, a life of purpose and merit, was gone forever. The man who was accustomed to commanding battleships and making his own decisions was now constitutionally required to walk 2 steps behind his wife for the rest of his life. He was forced to abandon his naval uniform for the ceremonial dress of a consort. He became a shadow to the monarch, his own ambitions relegated to the footnotes of history. The crown that Elizabeth inherited that day was not just a symbol of immense power and responsibility. For her husband, it was a crown of thorns. It forever altered the dynamic of their marriage, ending their freedom and beginning a lifetime of profound sacrifice and deep, private resentment. Their personal relationship was now secondary to the demands of the crown, a brutal reality that would haunt them for decades to come. The transition from a life of command and purpose to one of aimless, royal servitude was a swift and brutal shock for Prince Philip. The crushing reality of his new existence set in immediately. He was forced to move from Clarence House, the comfortable home he and Elizabeth had made their own, into the cold, cavernous, and impersonal halls of Buckingham Palace. It felt less like a home and more like a prison, a vast museum where he was just another exhibit. His role was utterly undefined. When he desperately sought a purpose, asking court officials what his new job was, he was met with infuriatingly vague platitudes and blank stares. The proud, energetic man who had once commanded warships found himself with absolutely nothing to do. He was a powerless figure in a rigid, ancient system that had no place for the husband of a queen. The old guard of courtiers, men who had served his father-in-law, now surrounded his wife, shutting him out of state affairs and dismissing his opinions with condescending smiles. He was an outsider in his own home. The humiliations were constant and deeply personal. He was expected to be a decorative accessory, a silent supporter who existed only in relation to his wife. His frustration and rage simmered just beneath the surface, occasionally boiling over in private. In one moment of pure agony, he lamented his predicament, reportedly shouting, "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba." This wasn't just about a lack of a job, it was about the systematic erasure of his very identity. He was trapped in a gilded cage, forced to smile and wave for the cameras, while his spirit was slowly being crushed by the immense, impersonal weight of the institution he had married into. He was the Queen's husband, but he was no longer his own man. The worst was yet to come. But that wasn't even the worst part. Nothing symbolized Philip's profound humiliation more than the vicious battle over his own children's surname. In the patriarchal world of the 1950 seconds, a man's name was his legacy, the most fundamental mark of his identity, and it was a right that was about to be savagely ripped away from him. The conflict was ignited by Philip's ambitious and arrogant uncle, Lord Mountbatten. Upon Elizabeth's ascension, he triumphantly and foolishly declared to friends that the House of Mountbatten would now reign over Britain. The statement sent seismic shockwaves through the heart of the establishment. The formidable Queen Mary, Elizabeth's grandmother, was appalled, and the bulldog Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, was absolutely horrified. They saw this as a hostile takeover by a foreign entity, a blatant rejection of British tradition. They insisted, with unbending force, that the royal family must remain the House of Windsor, a sacred tribute to Elizabeth's father, King George VI. Caught between her husband and the immense pressure of the government and her own family, the young queen made a fateful decision. She sided with the establishment. When she informed Philip that their children, Charles and Anne, would bear her surname, not his, he was apoplectic. To be denied the fundamental right of passing his name to his own children was the ultimate public emasculation. "I am the only man in the country not allowed to give his name to his own children," he raged. The decision created a deep and bitter rift in the early years of their marriage, a source of intense private arguments and furious public speculation. Though a compromise was eventually reached in 1960, creating the hybrid surname Mountbatten-Windsor for their descendants who were not in the direct line of succession, the initial wound never fully healed. It was a stark and brutal lesson for Philip. In this new world, he was not a partner, not a husband, and not a father in the traditional sense. He was a subordinate, a possession of the crown. Behind the carefully curated images of royal harmony and dutiful smiles, the marriage was often a private battlefield of fiery tempers and explosive arguments. The simmering resentments of a man trapped in a powerless role frequently erupted into what one royal journalist bluntly called fervent clashes. And on one infamous occasion, the world almost got a shocking glimpse behind the curtain. It happened during their grueling 1954 royal tour of Australia. An Australian film crew was waiting outside the couple's secluded chalet in Victoria, hoping to capture some candid footage. What they saw instead was a jaw-dropping marital meltdown. The front door of the chalet suddenly flew open, and a pair of tennis shoes and a tennis racket came hurtling out, thrown with considerable force. They were followed moments later by a furious Prince Philip, storming away from the house. An enraged Queen Elizabeth then appeared on the veranda, screaming at him to come back inside, before physically dragging her fuming husband back through the door. The camera crew, stunned, had captured the entire shocking exchange. But before they could process what they had witnessed, the royal press secretary, horrified at the potential diplomatic incident, descended upon them. He demanded they hand over the film reel, which he promptly exposed to the light, destroying the evidence forever. A short while later, a remarkably composed Queen Elizabeth emerged to address the shaken crew. "I'm sorry for that little interlude," she said calmly, "but as you know, it happens in every marriage." This astonishingly candid admission revealed the raw truth. Their relationship was no serene fairy tale. It was passionate, volatile, and deeply real. Friends and staff knew that Philip, with his blunt, often brutal honesty, would sometimes call the Queen a bloody fool in private arguments. She, in turn, was more than capable of holding her own, often cutting him down with a sharp, "Oh Philip, do be quiet, you don't know what you're talking about." This was how they functioned, with a raw, unfiltered honesty that the public was never, ever meant to see. The deep frustrations of his constrained role, combined with the constant, suffocating public scrutiny, soon gave rise to a far more damaging and persistent narrative: the whispers of infidelity. The handsome, charismatic prince, known for being a notorious ladies' man before his marriage, was now trapped in a role he clearly hated. It didn't take long for the public and the press to start wondering if he was seeking comfort and a taste of his old freedom in the arms of other women. The first major scandal erupted in 1948, and it centered on the glamorous stage actress and dancer Pat Kirkwood. Her famously long legs had been dubbed the eighth wonder of the world by one critic, and she was the toast of the London stage. The story was shocking. While a heavily pregnant Princess Elizabeth was at home, just months away from giving birth to Prince Charles, Philip reportedly paid a late-night visit to Kirkwood in her dressing room. The two were then said to have had supper together before dancing until dawn at a London nightclub. The press immediately seized on the salacious story, gleefully dubbing the pair the prince and the showgirl. The scandal became a persistent, ugly stain on Philip's reputation, the first of many such rumors that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Pat Kirkwood herself fiercely and consistently denied any romantic involvement, remaining bitter to the end of her days that Buckingham Palace never issued an official statement to clear her name. Whether the story was true or not was almost irrelevant. The rumors took root and flourished because they seemed so plausible. Here was a virile, adventurous man, stripped of his career and his identity, married to a woman who was now his sovereign. The narrative of a restless husband seeking an escape was simply too compelling to ignore. The whispers had begun, and they would never truly go away. The perfect royal marriage was starting to look dangerously flawed. But the rumors were about to get so much worse. The whispers of infidelity reached a fever pitch in 1956, when Prince Philip embarked on a long, 5-month solo tour of the Commonwealth aboard the royal yacht Britannia. The prolonged separation, combined with his reputation as a restless adventurer, fueled a toxic storm of speculation in the press. French publications ran wild with claims that he was being secretly entertained by an unknown woman in a private West End apartment. American newspapers openly questioned the state of the royal marriage. The situation became so poisonous that Buckingham Palace was forced to take the rare and extraordinary step of issuing a public denial. The Queen's press secretary released a stunning statement, declaring, "It is quite untrue that there is any rift between the Queen and the Duke," but this official denial did little to quell the rumors, and it did nothing to calm the Queen's own private torment. According to royal biographers, the Queen was being haunted by her own dark suspicions. Just before Philip departed on his long tour, she had reportedly made a shocking discovery. While inspecting his luggage, she allegedly found a photograph of a stunningly beautiful woman, the world-renowned Russian ballerina Galina Ulanova. The discovery is said to have left the young Queen deeply unsettled, planting a seed of doubt that would fester for months. Her suspicions were reportedly compounded when she later attended a performance of the Bolshoi Ballet in London, where Ulanova was the star. The Queen watched the dancers' every move with a chilling intensity that betrayed her inner turmoil. It was a moment of profound and private pain. A young monarch, the symbol of a nation, forced to sit in public and wonder if her husband's heart and his fidelity had truly strayed thousands of miles away. The fairy tale was unraveling. But of all the women linked to Prince Philip over the decades, none held as unique or as enduring a presence in his life as Penelope Penny Knatchbull. Beautiful, intelligent, and 30 years his junior, Penny was the wife of his godson and a close family friend. Their deep and intensely private friendship began in the 1970 seconds and blossomed through a shared passion for the exhilarating sport of carriage driving. For decades, Penny became his constant companion and most trusted confidant. She was one of the very few people outside the immediate royal family with whom he could be completely, unguardedly himself. Their bond was so profound and so intimate that it was dramatically portrayed in the hit Netflix series Time's The Crown, Times as a full-blown emotional affair, a suggestion that infuriated palace insiders and royal loyalists. The Queen's former press secretary, Dickie Arbiter, furiously denounced the depiction as a cruel absurdity, particularly galling as it was aired so soon after the Queen's death. He insisted that Philip was a window shopper who might have looked, but he never touched. Yet, the undeniable closeness of their connection fueled speculation for years. They spent countless hours together, traveling to equestrian events and sharing private conversations that were off-limits to everyone else. The depth of their bond was made powerfully clear to the entire world in 2021. At Prince Philip's funeral, a service strictly limited to just 30 mourners due to pandemic restrictions, Penny Knatchbull was one of the chosen few on the guest list. Her inclusion was a stunning public testament to the unique and powerful place she held in his life and in the Queen. While both she and the palace have always maintained that their relationship was purely platonic, Penny's constant, unwavering presence was a stark reminder of the deep emotional complexities that lay just beneath the placid surface of the royal marriage. She was the one person who seemed to offer him the intellectual partnership and emotional escape he so desperately craved. And then, in the twilight of his life, Prince Philip did the unthinkable. In May of 2017, at the age of 96, and after more than 7 decades of unwavering, relentless public service, Buckingham Palace announced that the Duke of Edinburgh was retiring. But this was no ordinary retirement. He didn't just step back from his duties, he staged a great escape. He physically separated himself from the Queen and the entire royal machine. He left the chaotic, gilded cages of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle behind and moved into Wood Farm, a relatively modest and secluded cottage on the sprawling Sandringham estate in Norfolk. It was a shocking and definitive move. The Queen, meanwhile, remained in London, bound by duty to continue her work as the reigning monarch. For the first time in their long marriage, they were officially living apart. The announcement sent seismic shockwaves through the nation and the world. Had there been a final, explosive argument? Was the marriage, after all these years, finally in crisis? The press ran wild with speculation, painting a picture of a man finally breaking free from a life he had long felt trapped in. It was a jaw-dropping final act in a long and complicated drama. His decision to live alone, away from his wife and the institution she embodied, left the public to wonder if the fairy tale had finally, and irrevocably, come to a bitter end. The man who had sacrificed everything was at last, it seemed, reclaiming his freedom. The truth, however, was even more poignant. The real reason for Philip's great escape was, as Princess Anne would later so devastatingly reveal, both much simpler and far more heartbreaking than any tawdry scandal. After a lifetime of relentless service, a lifetime of walking 2 paces behind his wife, he just wanted peace. He wanted out. And Wood Farm provided him with the perfect sanctuary. In his secluded cottage, he was no longer the Queen's consort, a ceremonial figurehead. He was simply Philip, a man finally living out his last years on his own terms. He established a calm, quiet routine. He spent his days reading voraciously from his vast library of history books, painting watercolors of the serene Norfolk landscape, and enjoying long, exhilarating carriage drives through the countryside. He was free from the endless handshakes, the stifling formality, and the crushing weight of public expectation. Though they now lived in different parts of the country, he and the Queen remained deeply connected, speaking on the phone every single day. Their unconventional arrangement was not the sign of a broken marriage, but of a deep, time-worn, and pragmatic understanding. The Queen, more than anyone, knew exactly how much he had sacrificed for her and for the crown. She fully supported his desperate desire for solitude, yet this peaceful existence was tragically punctuated by the cruel realities of old age. In January 2019, at the age of 97, he was involved in a horrific car crash near Sandringham when his Land Rover overturned after colliding with another vehicle. Though he miraculously escaped serious injury, the incident forced him to surrender his driver's license, a devastating blow to his fiercely independent spirit. And as the years wore on, the creeping effects of memory loss began to take their toll, adding a layer of profound and inescapable sadness to his isolated life. The Great Escape had brought him peace, but it could not stop the inevitable march of time. Then, in a cruel and deeply ironic twist of fate, the world itself conspired to end Prince Philip's peaceful solitude. In 2020, as the global COVID-19 pandemic swept across the planet, even the monarchy was forced into lockdown. For the safety of the elderly Queen and her husband, a drastic decision was made. Philip was brought back from his refuge at Wood Farm, and the couple were forced to isolate together at Windsor Castle. Palace staff immediately established a strict security arrangement, wryly nicknamed HMS Bubble, in a nod to Philip's lifelong connection to the Royal Navy. After years of deliberately living apart, the Queen and her husband were suddenly and unexpectedly confined under one roof, spending more continuous time together than they had in decades. This forced lockdown period became a strange and unexpected final chapter in their long and complicated story. Away from the relentless pressures of public duty, the endless ceremonies, and the constant noise of royal life, they settled into a remarkably quiet routine. They dined together every evening, a simple intimacy they had rarely enjoyed during their working lives. Aides reported that they simply enjoyed each other's quiet company, reading, talking, and watching television. It was a poignant and unforeseen return to the kind of simple domesticity they had last known on the island of Malta so many decades before. It was a quiet, gentle epilogue to a life lived in the full, unforgiving glare of the public eye. For Philip, it was a calm and peaceful end, a final, unexpected gift that allowed him to spend his last months in the constant, quiet presence of the woman he had stood beside and 2 paces behind for over 70 tumultuous years. The Great Escape was over. Sadly, it was the beginning of the end. Despite the tranquility of their final, unexpected year together, Prince Philip's formidable constitution was finally failing him. In February 2021, at the age of 99, he was admitted to King Edward VII's Hospital in London for treatment of an infection. His condition worsened, and he was transferred to St. Bartholomew's Hospital for a procedure on a pre-existing heart condition. After a month-long stay that gripped the nation, he was finally discharged and returned to Windsor Castle. He was physically frail, but his mind remained as sharp and irascible as ever. As his 100th birthday approached, he made it clear to his family that he wanted no fuss. He had always loathed being the center of attention and had no desire for a national celebration. He wanted a quiet end, and he got his wish. On the morning of the 9th of April 2021, just 2 months shy of that remarkable milestone, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, died peacefully in his bed at Windsor Castle. The Queen, his wife of 73 tumultuous years, was by his side. The official statement from Buckingham Palace was, as always, brief and formal, announcing his passing with deep sorrow, but the Queen's private words to her family revealed the true depth of her devastation. His death, she confided to her children, had left a huge void in her life. The world mourned the loss of a truly historic figure, a man who had been a constant presence on the world stage for over 7 decades. But behind the cold stone walls of Windsor Castle, a widow was grieving the loss of the man she had once famously called her strength and stay. He was the anchor of her long and often lonely reign, the only person on earth who saw her not as a monarch, but simply as a woman. The great love story, with all its complications and heartbreaks, was finally over. At Prince Philip's funeral, held under the stark, lonely restrictions of the global pandemic, a single image seared itself into the public consciousness. Queen Elizabeth, the steadfast monarch of 70 years, sat utterly alone on a carved wooden pew in St. George's Chapel, a solitary, diminutive figure in black, her face a hidden mask of grief. The image was a devastating and unforgettable symbol of her profound loss, a queen isolated in her final goodbye to the man who had been by her side for a lifetime. In the days that followed, heartfelt tributes from their children began to paint a more complex and intimate portrait of the man behind the gruff, public facade. A visibly emotional Prince Charles spoke of his dear papa as a man of remarkable energy and deeply devoted service to the Queen, his family, and the Commonwealth. But it was the words of their fiercely private daughter, Princess Anne, that brought the entire story full circle, delivering the final, heartbreaking bombshell. In a rare television interview, she called her father her teacher, her supporter, and her critic, a man of brutal, sometimes difficult honesty, but also of unwavering and absolute loyalty. Her reflections clarified the long-hidden truth behind their parents' unconventional and often separate lives. It was not a fairy tale. It was a partnership, a working relationship founded on a brutally pragmatic understanding of each other's needs and the impossible demands of their roles. His legacy was not just one of duty, but of a complicated, often difficult, but ultimately enduring love that survived the crushing, relentless weight of the crown. The tears that welled in King Charles's eyes as he heard his sister's confession were not just for a father lost, but for the final, shattering revelation of the profound and heartbreaking sacrifices his parents had been forced to make not just for their country, but from each other. The perfect marriage was a myth, but the story behind it was a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Thank you for watching Majesty Uncovered. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more incredible stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Majesty Uncovered and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video. Video description: **** illustration, image prompts, ***. A somber Princess Anne in her late 60s, seated in a dimly lit stately room, her face etched with a mix of resolve and sorrow as she speaks into an off-camera microphone. Intimate close-up shot, dramatic chiaroscuro lighting casting deep shadows, dust motes visible in a single light beam, ultra-photorealistic, 1080p, cinematic realism, 2R16, 9s750, style RAW, Q2. King Charles III, in his early 70s, seen in a private moment inside a palace study, his head bowed, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek, his expression one of profound shock and grief, soft, diffused light from a window illuminating the moisture on his face, ultra-photorealistic, high detail, emotional depth, cinematic, FR16, 9s750, style RAW, Q2. A symbolic portrait of an elderly Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip standing back to back, not looking at each other, a vast, cold distance between them, set against the imposing, dark architecture of Buckingham Palace, dramatic, moody lighting, ultra-photorealistic, hyper-detailed textures on their clothing, 1080 PAR16, 9-S750, style RAW, Q2. A young, happy Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip in the 1950 seconds, laughing in an open-top car in sunny Malta, a stark contrast to their later years, vibrant, warm, saturated colors, lens flare from the sun, capturing a moment of lost freedom, photorealistic, nostalgic film grain, AR16-9, S750, style RAW, Q2, the imposing silhouette of Buckingham Palace at twilight, storm clouds gathering overhead, a single light burning in one window, symbolizing the loneliness of the monarchy, wide-angle shot, dramatic, cold blue and gray color palette, ultra-photorealistic, cinematic atmosphere, color 16-9, S750, style RAW, Q2. An elderly Prince Philip, looking resolute but weary, staring out the window of a rustic cottage, wood farm, the Norfolk countryside bleak outside, his face in profile, capturing a sense of profound isolation and final escape, natural, melancholic lighting, hyper-realistic detail on his aged features, 1080p, that AR16, 9s750, style RAW, Q2. A beautifully framed royal wedding portrait of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, but the glass is cracked directly between them, the fracture spiderwebbing outwards, symbolizing the shattered myth of their marriage, dramatic lighting highlighting the broken glass, ultra-photorealistic, high-contrast, deep shadows, Peace Place, R16-9, S750, style RAW, Q2. Queen Elizabeth II sitting completely alone on a single pew in the vast, empty street, George's Chapel during Prince Philip's funeral, a small, solitary figure in black, her head bowed in grief, dramatic, stark lighting from high windows, emphasizing her isolation, ultra-photorealistic, powerful and emotional cinematic shot, AR 16:9, S750, style RAW, Q2, illustration, image, prompts 16:9, 1080p. Asterisk, asterisk, SEO tags, asterisk, asterisk. Royal family, Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, King Charles, Princess Anne, British monarchy, royal family secrets, Princess Anne confession, Queen Elizabeth marriage, Prince Philip secret, royal scandal, Buckingham Palace, Windsor, royal family documentary, untold story, royal history, King Charles crying, majesty, royal news, British royals, SEO tags. English. Asterisk asterisk, thumbnail prompts. Asterisk, asterisk. Extreme close-up on King Charles's face, a single tear captured with hyper-realistic detail on his cheek, his eyes wide with shock and sorrow, a slightly blurred image of the Queen and Philip in the background, dramatic side-lighting, ultra-eye-catching, photorealistic, AR-16, 9bs S750, style RAW, 2. Split-screen thumbnail. On the left, a classic black-and-white photo of a smiling young Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip on their wedding day. On the right, a hyper-realistic image of a somber, older Princess Anne looking directly at the camera as if telling a secret, a dramatic red dividing line between them, AR-16, 9 S750, style RAW. 2. A powerful, photorealistic portrait of Princess Anne, her expression stern and serious, with the words, "The lie," I had to tell in bold, impactful text next to her, dramatic lighting from one side, creating deep shadows, intense and mysterious vibe, AR 16:9, S750, style RAW, Q2, a haunting, photorealistic image of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip in their old age, standing far apart in a grand, empty ballroom, looking in opposite directions, symbolizing their separate lives, cool desaturated color palette, text overlay reading 70 Years of Secrets, eye-catching and intriguing AR 16:9 S750, style RAW, Q2, hyper-realistic close-up of a royal family photograph. But it is being visibly torn in half right down the middle, separating the Queen from Prince Philip, dynamic motion blur on the hands tearing the photo, extremely high detail on the torn paper edges, dramatic and shocking concept. AR 16:9, S750, style RAW, Q2. Thumbnail prompts 16:9, 1080p. Engaging thumbnail concepts. Generation summary. Channel name used. Majesty uncovered. Opening hook. Generated 10 to 20 second attention grabber. Total characters. 36834. Chapters generated. 18. Language, English. Knowledge sections applied. 12/12. Cultural elements preserved. Yes. Enhanced features. Complete package ready.